Hello, it's Kyle Stallings. We're here today on February 22, 2024 at the Tomball Museum Center. We're in the Fellowship Hall and here today to speak with Mr. Leon Strack. This is part of our ongoing video interview series, oral history project with the Tomball Museum and the Tomball branch of the Harris County Library. You can see this video and our other videos at our YouTube channel at Tomball Museum. Would you give us your name, please?
Leon Strack.
And when were you born?
June 19th, 1941.
Tell us about your wife and kids.
My wife, she was from Rose Hill. Her name was Laverne Bradigam. Her parents' name were Simon and Elsie Bradigam. And we have 3 children, the oldest being Paula, then Sandra, and lastly Dwayne.
And do they still live around this area?
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm.
Great. Tell us about your wife's family, the Bradigams. What branch was that, and how they're tied in with the Bradigams grocery store?
Well, her father was Simon Bradigam, and her grandfather's name was Fred Bradigam. Fred Bradigam was a half-brother to G.W. Bradigam, who had the store.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And did her branch grow up around the Rose Hill area or Deckers Prairie or whereabouts?
Her branch grew up at Rose Hill. Okay. Actually, her grandparents' place is where Holly Creek is right now. Her grandfather owned 199 acres there. Went all the way to Spring Creek. And he died, I think, when my wife was just a baby in 1941 or 42. The land was divided at that time. Grandma Bradigam got 100 acres. The 3 children divided to 99 acres, giving each one of them 33 acres. That's what my father-in-law got. And they lived there on that place until 1954, and that's when they moved on Cedar Lane. They built a new house there at that time and moved there.
Tell me about your parents. What were their names?
My father's name was Lawrence. Mother's name was Edna. My mother was a Hildebrandt. Her maiden name was Hildebrandt.
And how do you spell that, Hildebrandt?
Hildebrandt.
And where was your dad born and where did he grow up?
Actually, he was born in a house on Root Road. As you go down Root Road, the road crosses a railroad track and makes a right-hand turn, runs parallel to the railroad. And as I've been told and understand, there was a rent house right at that particular intersection that was rented out, and at that time that's where my father was born, at that place there. It was just rented at that time.
What area is that, Root Road?
Well, if you go down Kirkendall Road, you turn left on Dowdell Road, it goes down probably about 1/3 of a mile, and then that's where Dowdell ends there. Root Road makes a right-hand turn and continues on to Goslin Road.
Kind of over toward where Spring is, or the part of the Woodlands?
Yeah, Spring, actually Spring,
okay.
Spring address.
Yeah. All right, and did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had 1 brother, 2 sisters.
What are their names?
I was the oldest. Bonnie was next to me. She was born 13 months after I was. Then Leroy, and then Beverly.
Do any of those, did they live around the Tomball area?
Bonnie lives here in Tomball. Mm-hmm. My brother lives in Salado. He moved there. His daughter and son-in-law at that time had teaching jobs in Killeen, so he moved in that area. He lives in Salado. My sister Beverly lives in Belleville, Texas, not far from here.
Yeah. So tell me about your mom, the Hildebrandt, and her Hildebrandt family.
Well, my great-great-grandfather come over here from Germany in 1873. He'd been here about 6 weeks, and members of his family, along with himself, got some kind of a flu-like, and he decided the closest doctor at that time was in Waller, Texas. And they lived over off of Kirkendall Road near Cypress Creek between 1960 and Louetta Road. And he set out on horseback to go to Waller to a doctor. And of course, back then there were no radios, no way of knowing. This happened to be in the fall or the winter. I assume it was probably warm at the time he left, or not very cold. During the time he left, there was an extremely cold front blew in, and he was ill to begin with when he left, and he got very, very sick and died either on the way up there or at Waller at the doctor. Now, my mother told me that he froze to death. They found him next to some bushes or a brush. His horse was there, and that he, died there. But so, my grandfather was one of the sons. They moved. He bought some land at the end of Dowdell Road, where Root Road makes a right-hand turn. He bought land. He actually acquired one section of land, 640 acres. And they farmed cotton, potatoes, and corn were the big crops and cash crops. He had cattle and sheep also. During his time there, he enticed a lumber company from Beaumont, it was Beaumont Lumber Company, to come set up a sawmill on his place. And of course they moved everything from Beaumont on the railroad and unloaded it and moved it over by his place. There was a sawmill there, and they had boarding houses. They built boarding houses. They had a little commissary there, for the employees. And they also had what they called a little dinky train. They made a road bed. They built a train track. It was smaller gauge rail, but that's how they hauled the logs up to the mill from out of the woods. It went way back into the woods, I think, to Spring Creek, if I'm not mistaken.
And roughly what years do you think that operated?
That was sometime in late 18s, I would say, late 1800s.
Nice. You think it was a steam train, or?
Oh yes, it was steam. Everything, even the sawmill was steam operated at that time. Mm-hmm.
So I've seen photos from like the early 1900s or later 1920s around Tomball, and it looked like south of Tomball is pretty much bald prairie, except I guess around the creeks. Is that, do you think, the way it was back then?
Yes, yes. A lot of this, with the exception of what, there was some woods then, but a lot of it was just bald prairie. I can remember the time we had a heavy rain. I was probably in the first grade. I didn't go to school that day because water was probably about a foot high in the yard. Due to the railroad acting as a dam. There was only some large pipes, where the water had to funnel through. And I didn't go to school that day. And that evening, the school bus that I could see from where I lived on Root Road all the way over on Boudreaux Road, same as there, the water was high. The school bus had started down that road, got part of the way, and of course the water drowned the engine out. And that just tells you how open it was then. I could see all the way to Boudreaux Road, way down Boudreaux Road, where the school buses were stalled.
And that Rood Road property, that was your grandfather? What was his name?
My grandfather was John Hildebrandt. My great-grandfather was Johann Hildebrandt.
And what were their wives' names?
My great-grandfather's name was Caroline. Her maiden name was Miller.
Muelleller?
Correct. And my grandfather's name, ironically, her maiden name was Katie Strack, but she was descendant on further down the line of Stracks. No, there was no real close kin. I don't know, they were probably, like my mom and dad, I'm assuming they were probably about fourth cousin, which was similar to a lot of the marriages back in those days because there wasn't that many people out here. As was the case in those days, the men didn't have a whole lot of money to buy a car. They didn't get out very far. If they had a car, they wasn't able to buy a lot of gas to get very far to go out and see other women or date other women. Actually, my dad worked for my grandfather, Hildebrand, and I guess I assume that's how he met my mom. Mm-hmm. Back then, there weren't a whole lot of jobs available out here other than farm work, or there were a few cotton gins or things like that, you know, where men could acquire work. But as far as being employed, you know, jobs were few and far between.
So let's see, your dad was, what was his name again?
Lawrence.
And his dad was Gus, is that right?
Yes,
Gus A. Strack?
Mm-hmm.
Who was Gus's wife?
Hulda Singer.
S-C-N-G-E-R?
Yes, that's one way of spelling it. It was spelled a number of different ways. The Singer, they call it Singer. Some of it, actually, there's a tombstone in Salem Cemetery, and my great uncle, it's S-I-N-G-E-R. But the actual German spelling of it was S-A-E-N-G-E-R. And then some of them spelled it just S-E-N-G-E-R. And there is a Singer Gully, begins somewhere down there around Spring behind where the Booty Cemetery is, crosses I-45, and goes, I think it empties into Cypress Creek.
And where did Gus and his family live?
My grandparents lived on Goslin Road. Actually, after they married, as I was mentioning earlier, they rented that house there at Root Road. They lived there. I think my dad and my uncle, the oldest uncle next to my dad, were both born there. And they eventually bought, I think it was 26 acres from the Bonings on the Gosling Road, and that's where they lived the rest of their life then.
And his dad was Henry Strack, is that right?
Yes.
And who was his wife?
Henry Strack, I'd have to look that up.
It looked like Elizabeth Weed.
Yeah, Elizabeth Weed,
And that's W-I-E-D?
Correct,
Where was the Weed family from?
The Weeds actually lived in the area of Louetta Road and Kirkendall. And that's where my great-grandfather lived, was on the north side of Louetta Road, and just a little ways down from Kirkendall, east of Kirkendall.
And what did Henry Strack and Elizabeth Weed, what did they do their lives?
Well, most of the people back then farmed, raised sheep, and some had hogs. I don't know whether they had any cattle. I don't think they had cattle. A lot of the first ones that come over from Germany, you know, had cattle too. But to have cattle, you had to have quite a bit of land, you know, to make it profitable.
All right, and then Henry's dad was John or Johannes H. Strack, is that right?
Henry's dad was Heinrich.
Heinrich?
Yes, he'd been over here, somewhere around 6 or 8 years, and I think he got typhoid fever, and he passed away. And was custom then, if there was an unmarried brother, that brother was rather obligated to marry the widow and care for the widow and the children. And that was Johann Yost.
And that widow would have been Elizabeth Singer?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So you brought some books here today. What parts of your family did we miss there?
Well, that pretty much covered it. Let's see. There was the Herman Strack was the first one to come over. Then Frederick Strack come over. Yost Strack come over. Heinrich Strack come over here, and then Jacob Strack come over. Those were the four. Herman was the first, and the other four followed some years later. I don't know whether they all come at the same time. It really doesn't describe that.
And do you know what part of Germany they came from?
It was actually called Prussia back then, and they come over here for more freedom. As I understand, back then, the rulers back then didn't allow them to own much land, or then they were taxed really high. Whatever they grew, they had, say if they grew potatoes or pigs, whatever they grew, it was something that would produce a lot on small acreage. And then as they had children, that their little piece of acreage was divided up more and more. So that's the reason for some of them, seeking to come to the New World. They were actually more or less slaves to the government, to the ruling government over there. They were left with little to live on. The ruling family had the advantage of getting all the wood they wanted out of the woods for the heat. The peasants were left with little, to accommodate their needs. And the same way with hunting, that was only allowed for the ruling family, the rulers there. And if anybody disagreed with them, they were either executed or put in prison.
Pretty tough way to live.
Yes.
So does that book tell when the first brother might have come over, roughly? Or
1848 is when Herman and his wife come over.
Great. Can you hold up the cover of that book and show it to the camera? Tell us a little bit about that book.
All right, this was compiled for the 150-year anniversary of the Stracks coming over. Rebecca Strack, or Becky as a lot of people knew her, done most of the legwork on that, a lot of the research, as well as Dorothy Strack Brown and Margie Strack Myers. They went to the courthouse, obtained a lot of the records, went to churches, and got a lot of the records. They put in many hours compiling this book for the benefit of those that follow, so we have, the history would be recorded.
It looked like from some of the material I found that Becky Strack was involved also in the Chaparral genealogy group here in Tomball.
Yes, she was a very industrious person when it comes to, looking into things like that and compiling history.
And then I found this article in one of the Tomball books about the Chester Strack book and Becky Strack. Can you tell us about their family and how they're related?
Chester Strack family was actually from the Herman Strack side of the family, which was the first one to come over. Don't remember on down the line, but they were actually the descendants of the Herman Strack family. Yeah.
Great. And he lived in Tomball, him and Becky, for a while?
Yes. Becky and Chester did live on, I believe, Ritchie Road at one time. And Becky inherited some land up on Decker Prairie Rose Hill Road, and that's where they built a house in their later years.
What was her maiden name?
Tottenham.
Yeah. I've heard of some Tottenhams over by Westfield. Is that the same
Correct.
Totten hens.
Yeah. Her dad was Carl Totten Hen. Well, let me just read this part of it for you here. North Harris County had rich farmland and water. The early settlers made a living by farming and ranching. They raised cotton, potatoes, and corn. There was timber to build homes and barns. They raised cattle, sheep, and chickens to feed their families. Women worked in the fields with their husbands. And I feel for them poor women because their day a lot of times started at 4:30, 5 o'clock back then. They had wood stoves, or in the wintertime they had wood heaters. They had to get up along with their husbands, to start making fire in the stove or heater if it was cold. And of course they had to cook the meals, do the washing, which was a chore then because they had the big cast iron wash pots. That was an all-day affair for them to wash clothes. It wasn't nothing easy. Plus, they did help in the fields too. I know my mother-in-law told it was Laverne's grandmother picking cotton out in the fields, in a cotton sack, dragging a cotton sack, and they'd put the baby on the cotton sack and pull that baby along on the cotton sack, in the fields. Of course, they had to go at noontime. Had to quit sometime before noon, go in and prepare the noon meal, and then they'd come back out and probably help again whenever they could. They couldn't do it every day because there was other chores for the ladies too, But life wasn't easy for them. It said then there was the house chores to do as making clothes, quilts, canning, preserving food. They had to they didn't have any refrigeration. Everything then was canned, put in jars for the winter. And wash day was a busy day for them, and it would usually take them all day long. Cattle grazed in the open range. They had a lot of open prairie and wood lands to roam. The men had to round up the cattle, which sometimes took days. Most of the buyers, they were driven to railroad sidings and shipped by train to Kansas and other places. There would be buyers at these railroad sidings, and I can well remember the cattle pens in Tomball by the railroad siding there. They would bring their cattle there, and that was, I do remember them hauling cattle in the railroad cattle cars. They were wood. Of course, they were metal frame cars, but the sides were wood siding, and they had spaces between them, for the air to get into the cows. But we lived right close to a railroad track, and in the earlier years, I could hear the cattle mooing, in the rail cars as they went by. It says in 1933, the stock law came into effect, causing fences to be built for the animals. Before the stock law, all animals had to have a brand to identify each person's cattle, because everybody's cattle just that generally stayed in the same herd, but sometimes they would get mixed up. It said many who came from Germany endured many hardships and diseases, but through all of that, they continued to prosper, making a good living, and their hopes and dreams were fulfilled. It says the church was an inspiration to their dreams. They knew God was with them in these endeavors. It was important for them to be married in a church, have their children baptized in a church, and for the ministers, family, and friends to be there for them in their times of need. It was a place for them to also visit with family and friends.
That's a good summary. Do you remember if your family had any cattle brands through the years?
My grandfather did.
You know what his brand was?
No, I sure don't. And if I remember correctly, I think my uncle had a brand too. The brands had to be registered in the courthouse.
Which uncle was that?
Paul Hildebrand.
Okay.
Yeah, Uncle Paul farmed a lot. He vegetable farmed. He raised peas, squash, were his main cash crops, I guess. And of course, he grew a lot of corn for his cattle. The corn would dry. I think he did sell some corn sometime, for what we call roasting ears. It was green corn he would take to the market when it was green. But a lot of his corn he would let dry, and that was always a job we had before school started. Had a team of mules and a wagon, and I and my cousins, you know, Paulie's two boys, we'd pull that corn, throw it in the wagon, and when the wagon was full, we had to take it to the barn, and there was a stall there that had a floor in it, and that's where the corn had to be shoveled into, you know, for the winter. Wintertime, it'd be loaded in a truck and taken to, there was several places that ground corn and made feed out of it. They ground the whole ear of corn, the shucks, cob, and the granules, kernels. And of course, that's what they fed the cattle in the wintertime for a number of years.
I've heard of corn crib. Is that what y'all call it?
Yeah, corn crib. That's right, exactly. Usually, the corn crib had slats in it, and there was made up of most were 1x4, some 1x6s, but there would always be an opening about 2 inches for the air to get through. You know, even though the corn was dried, temperature changes, you know, caused it maybe to sweat a little bit, and that would let air get through it to dry it out again, keep it dry, or keep the humidity down.
How did he market the things he wanted to sell?
Well, we got into picking a lot of that. Peas and squash, they would be picked the day before, and then the next morning, usually my uncles, had two of them that farmed, or there was others farmers had here too. They would go to the farmer's market, be there around 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they would generally, there was buyers that come, they didn't have all the big stores back then that they do now. Weingarten's was one, Jamel's was one, and there were a lot of independent little groceries. They would come to the market and buy the vegetables that they wanted to sell in their store.
Where was the market at back then?
Originally, the market was downtown. The old market, I think, was on Congress Street.
Market Square?
Yeah, But later, that's when they moved out on Airline Drive because they needed more, larger area, more room. The farmers went there, sell their stuff. And later on, a lot of the farmers had regular buyers that took their produce. Even though they went to the market, you know, those buyers would come there and buy their product because they knew what they were getting. You know, it was good quality stuff.
A while ago, we were talking about sawmills, and I heard of some sawmills around the Klein area. Did the Stracks have a sawmill in that area?
Yes, over, actually it was a little out of the Klein, a little over toward 1960. Jacob Strack had a sawmill, and he was very prosperous. He done, you know, cut a lot of lumber there. That sawmill was there for a number of years. And I think he had one son that had a sawmill too, where about somewhere where Mr. Heaton's feed mill is. I remember years ago there was some concrete foundations there that sawmill sat on.
Is that Frank Heaton?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some years back there was still some concrete foundations there for that. I don't know if they're still there or not.
Were there other things you had marked you want to talk about in there?
That's about it on this part of the Stracks.
I think that kind of demonstrates it's pretty tough living back there. The people lost family members quite often.
Oh yeah, diseases come about. You know, they really didn't have the cures for them, especially not like they do now. You know, and if some of them got like typhoid fever or even bad flus or colds, you know, people didn't survive it. You know. A lot of the women in here, as you go through, a lot of the women had died after childbirth. You know, I guess infections set in, and you know they just didn't have the medications needed, you know, to combat the infections. Plus, they didn't have the things that were sterile, you know, probably for the women during childbirth.
Yeah.
You know. But a lot of women died either in childbirth, a lot of them really after childbirth, you know, I assume from infections.
So what's this other book that you brought with us?
That's Hildebrandt book.
Okay, let's talk about that one. You want to show the cover of it first?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, let's see. Now the date shows 1786. That goes back into Germany, actually, some of the, further back. My great grandfather come over here in 1873.
Hildebrandt grandfather?
Yeah.
All right.
The Hildebrandt.
And do you know who wrote this book or helped with it?
It was a lady, done a lot of research on it. Her name was Louise Hildebrandt Voucher. She was very interested in looking into the family history. And actually there was some that went over to Germany and visited some of the Hildebrandts in Germany. And went to some of the churches where some of the records of the Hildebrandt family, was kept.
That's nice. What did you want to talk about in there?
Well, this is, I guess it starts off about, that was my great-great-grandfather, Johannes Hildebrandt. He come to America, USA, in 1873. And let's see, a lot of the records come out of Germany and archives in Hamburg, Germany. What's in Hamburg, Germany? He came to the USA with his second wife, Dorothea Nee Zimmerman. As I was telling you, the Zimmermans, had a sawmill, that was this Dorothea's brother. And they come with their 6 of their 9 children. They left some behind. They brought the sons along because a lot of over there, when they become of a certain age, they were automatically, had to go into the military. And a lot of the things they had to fight for was against what their actual beliefs were. Everything there was you had to, for the government. Whereas a lot of the Germans, wanted a lot of do things where they could have something for themselves. It's kind of contrary to their belief. But if you disputed it, well, it was meant death or prison. Some of the children were, let's see, one of the children was Johannes. That was my great-grandfather. Then it was Johann Klaus. I don't know why they always had to have that Johann on there, but it was Johann Klaus. George Theodore, and Carl Hildebrandt. And they originally, as I maybe told you before, they settled in the area of off of Kirkendall Road near Cypress Creek between 1960 and Louetta Road. The exact location I do not know, but that's what it lists in the book. But my grandfather had only been here, great-great-grandfather had only been here a short time, and he got pneumonia and died. So I think my great-great-grandmother married a man by the name of Henry Roth, but for some reason it didn't work out, and the marriage was short-lived, and she took her name back, her Hildebrandt name back, and there's no record in here of her remarrying again.
So do you know how the Hildebrandt family came to the area around where they came to, there around Klein or?
Around Klein, I assume maybe through marriage. My great-grandfather married Caroline Miller. The Miller place, as I know it, was on the let's see, northwest corner of Kirkendall Road and Dowdale Road. That's where the Mueller property was.
And so I was interested about this general area and how the Hildebrandts decided to come to this part of Texas instead of, say, further out like New Braunfels or somewhere. Do you know?
Well, a lot of people were headed toward New Braunfels, Fredericksburg, because it reminded them of the part of Germany that they came from. But due to, if they come in the wintertime, whenever it was a lot of wet weather, the wagons bogged down. Some of them got sick, and they just decided to settle in this area here. Plus the fact that they liked the area due to the type of soil that was here. There was woods land. A lot of it was open, you know, where they could have cattle graze the prairies, and they would also have woods land for their firewood and to have timber cut, you know, where they could make lumber off of it to build their homes and barns.
And how about the Strack family? Did you ever hear why they ended up in this part of Texas instead of some other part further off?
Probably the same reason. Yeah. Some of them, a lot of the settlers that come over here paid package deals that were supposed to pay for their trip over here on the ship, plus someone to be here to accommodate them in Galveston when they, you know, got off of the ship. And a lot of time there was no one there. That they got kind of rooked out of that part of the deal.
Yeah.
And they had to find their own way, you know, pay. A lot of them didn't have a lot of money left coming, you know, with them anymore, but somehow they managed to get further inland.
All right, what else did you want to talk about? This was a Hildebrandt book.
Yes. I think I told you my great-grandfather, you know, got sick right after he come over here. And my great-grandfather, you know, he lived across the railroad there on the end of Dowdale Road, across the railroad track. He had, let's see, it was 3 boys and 3 girls, I believe, that survived. There was more children born, but back then a lot of time there were children that died too, you know, never made it much past childbirth, you know. But back then when my great-grandfather divided his land up, and it was just a common thing then, that the land that he had was divided amongst the sons only. My great uncles were my grandfather and the 2 great uncles were the one that inherited, you know, his land. Whereas the girls married, they were expected to be provided a place from their spouse's side of the family. I mean, that was just kind of rule of thumb then. But as my grandfather, during his generation come along, he did divide his land equally amongst, you know, all his 4 children. So that's how my mother and dad, you know, got their place. And my uncles and my aunt got their place. At that time, he was very successful. It was hard work. He had a lot of cattle, farmed, and he managed to, each one of his children, he built them a house and a barn and a chicken house, you know, on each of their places. Give them, each one of his children, land and built them the means where they have a place to live and to get started. And most all of them farmed at that time. You know. Of course, everybody had chickens back then too.
Did any of them, on Stracks or any other part of your family, did they have dairies or did this dairy cows just for themselves?
None of my aunt Helen, which was a Strack, she married a Matsky from Cyprus, and they dairied. They had a dairy, but none of my immediate uncles here, you know, went into dairying. They either had range cattle or farmed. Now my dad farmed on his place until about 1943 or 1944, and then he had laying hens at first, and then he started getting some, he went into the broiler business. That's whenever he'd get baby chicks from a hatchery in Dallas. It was Western Hatcheries in Dallas. He would order them baby chicks. They'd come to Huffsmith on a passenger train. And we'd meet the train there and, you know, pick up the baby chicks. And he'd feed them out until they were about 8 weeks old. They would weigh 3.5 pounds, and that's when he would market them as broilers, as they call them then. They were nice sized chicken, you know, to fry or bake or whatever, you know, they were tender. He sold some to Bradigham's each week. Bradigham's IGA store in Tomball here, they would get on average about 225 a week. And they had their own processing plant on their premises. You know, they processed chickens themselves, sold them in the store. And then he would sell, and this is on average, probably another 225 a week to a place in Houston. It was Houston Poultry and Egg Company. They would buy from him. Because somehow he always raised a good quality of chicken. I don't know, he knew how to do it. Back then, the fat on the back was a big thing, you know, and he got his feed from Archer Grain Company in Houston, and he would always put out that pelletized feed. It was a medicated feed, which might not go over very good nowadays, but that's what everybody had kept the diseases down, you know. And then he would top that feed off with, it was ground up corn, they call it corn chops. And that would really make for a nice, tender bird.
So what schools did you attend growing up?
The first 4 years I went to Trinity Lutheran School, a parochial school. For the first 3 years, we could ride the public school bus. As I understand, we rode the school bus, the public school got the stipend for each student, you know. Even though we didn't go to school there, they got the stipend for whatever the students got at that time.
Is that the Trinity Lutheran in Klein?
Correct, yeah. And that ended at the end of the third grade. They stopped that. For the fourth grade, my parents and my uncle and a neighbor, we'd done shared carpooling. You know, they would take us to school and get us from school. But that didn't work out real good. You know, it interfered with the day's work. So after starting fifth grade, I went to Klein School on Spring Cypress. That's whenever we just had 3 buildings there. There was the elementary school was in the middle, and well, grades 1 through 8 was in the middle. High school was on the west end, and cafeteria and the band hall was on the east end.
What year did you graduate?
1959.
What did you do after that?
For a short time, I worked at the Ford dealer here in Tomball, Hall Motor Company at that time. I worked in the parts department. I thought I was going to try that, and I don't know, it just wasn't my cup of tea. And so I quit, and then I done carpenter work. I worked for some framing contractors there in Klein, Tyson Miller. Done that about 6 months, and I didn't like walking them top plates. So I quit that, and then I went to work for the local butane company over at Klein, AAA Butane, AAA Butane Company. I worked for them 5 years. And after that, they were a good family-owned company to work for, but I wanted something a little bit more secure, you know, as far as retirement and things like that. I went to work for Texaco in Houston. First year or two, I worked in the warehouse, worked on the loading facility, and after that I drove the petroleum transport trucks. We delivered gasoline to the stations, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel to the airports, and then later on we went and got our gas additive from a location to put in with our gasoline.
How long did you work there?
32 and a half years. They were the first ones to decide they wanted to get out of the transportation business. So they'd done away with their transportation fleet. And I went to work for Andrews Transport at that time, that had the contract to Hall, Texaco's product. I worked for them 6.5 years. And then I retired.
What have you been doing with your retirement years?
I kind of fell into working with my son, Dwayne. He was big in the hay business, doing custom work for some of the people that had cattle, around. Plus he grows hay, selling coastal hay to people that have horses. And he does do cow hay too. He, sells cow hay.
Through the years, do you have any memories or stories you've heard about Marvin and Veda Beckendorf, or the get-togethers they would have at that place?
Not a whole lot, but I know I've heard everybody say Veda was a good cook and could bake good. I can attest to that. One time, Dwayne, we done hay for Marvin and Veda, and come time for him to pay, he'd ask Dwayne to come over, to pick up a check. Of course, we was always busy, and finally, Marvin told me, y'all come over on this day. So we went over there with Veda and made a lemon pie. Oh, and it was good. I can tell you that much.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've seen over there, it has a circular brick column with a doorway cut in it, and I've heard that in the old days it would have had a wood water tank on the top of that.
That's correct.
Was that fairly common around the Tomball area?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my grandparents, my grandpa and grandma Hildebrandt, they had one. It wasn't, I don't believe it was on a brick column, it was on some kind of a wooden structure, I believe. But there was a wooden water tank up there. And a lot of places had it. By being elevated, it'd give more static pressure, being higher up to get water flow into the house.
So I guess they had a lot of them maybe had either a water pump or a windmill.
Yeah, a windmill. Way back, all they had was a windmill, and then if the wind didn't blow, they always had a pump with a long handle on it.
Like a hand pump?
That's correct. Yeah. All right, this here is Salem Lutheran School, the old school. This is where Laverne went to school, grades 1 through 8. And of course after that she went to Tomball High School on Main Street. But she went to first 8 grades to the school, which is now the Boy Scout troops, where they meet at.
It's still, the building's still there behind the church there.
The building is behind Salem Lutheran Church.
And Laverne was your wife, right?
Correct.
Let's hold that up for the camera. We'll let Bob take a photo later. So she went through 8th grade there, and then where did she go after that?
She went to Tomball High School on Main Street.
The old, is that the one that burned?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where she went to school.
Did she graduate before it burned, or after?
Yes. No, she graduated. We graduated, and both graduated the same year, 1959.
Okay.
I don't know what year it burned. It was
61 or so?
61. Yeah, it wasn't long after that.
Yeah. How did y'all meet?
My third cousin was going with, her name was Elaine Fralick, which was Norman Fralick's daughter, the one that had the blacksmith shop in Rose Hill there. He was dating her. And Laverne and Elaine were good friends. Kenneth is a third cousin of mine, and so I think Elaine was just going to try to find somebody, for Laverne to go with, so now they're going on double dates, things like that. And so that's how we met, on a blind date, and it worked out good.
That's great.
Yeah, we had 63 good years, almost 63 good years of marriage. When she got about, I guess, 76 or 76 and a half, well, I didn't realize it then, but as I look back, I could see signs of dementia, setting in. And of course, it progresses along. And she passed away October 7th of last year. But we had raised 3 good children. She was a good Christian lady, you know, raised by good parents. And she and I both grew up in, I guess, German Lutheran homes. Neither of us parents were very wealthy, you know. We both grew up under kind of the same circumstances, so we made a good match. She was a good wife.
And how many generations back on your family or her family or the Hildebrandts or any other families in your tree did they actually speak much German?
The German families out here, a lot of them talked German until World War II started. Mm-hmm. And after that, well, it was kind of a no-no then, you know. Actually, I think Laverne's parents, they spoke German to her at home. She didn't really know much English till she went to school. That's where she learned a lot of English. I can remember my mom and dad speaking German, the German language, you know, at home. But whenever I got probably about 3 years old or 3.5 years, maybe 4 years old, you know, they thought they better start talking English to prepare me to go to school.
That was also the war years, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now they would talk German at home or amongst family, but when they got out, you know, in the open public, well, they didn't speak German then at that time. But I can remember when my dad would bring chickens to Tomball. My mom would always send a list of groceries to be bought whenever they were taking the chickens out of the coop and processing them. My dad would always do the thing. He'd go to the bank or do the grocery shopping, or he'd always meet up with some of them people. A lot of them, you know, from Rose Hill come to Tomball to buy their stuff. You know, they'd always talk German. That was after the war had ended. You know?
Yeah. Throughout most of the years, which church were y'all involved with?
I went to Trinity Lutheran Klein up until the time that I got married, or a little before I got married. That's whenever I just transferred my membership to Salem. Laverne's parents always went to Salem and Rose Hill, and that's where I maintained my membership ever since. You know.
Were some of your family involved in establishing Salem through the years?
Her family, perhaps. I think Johann, if I remember right, Johann Yost helped establish Salem way back. And I remember actually, that was before there was a church in Klein. I remember my grandfather telling me whenever he was a boy at home, they, you know, would come to Salem in a wagon, horse and wagon, team and a wagon. About noon Saturday, he said they would leave there. They would always feed their pigs, cows, chickens, and put out quite a bit of feed. And then they would leave about noon. My great-great-grandmother would prepare some meals, some things for food, you know. And they would leave and they would come and the mules and the wagon and they stayed with the Tices that lived on the Lutheran Church Road there.
Is that Henry Tice's family?
I think it is, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Henry Tice building from there that was just south of the church is the one we have here in the museum.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it was a house, because that's the one he said they stayed at. They would come there, get there in the evening. It took a couple of hours to get there, and they would stay the night, eat in the evening, and eat breakfast in the morning, and they would go to church. And they would come back and eat the noon meal, and then, you know, they would head back toward what called Willow. Where my great-grandparents lived, they call it, it's still known as Willow, they call it Willow Switch. There was a railroad siding there.
So that's just near Willow Creek, isn't it?
Correct, not too far from Willow Creek, yeah. Willow Creek actually starts up in Rose Hill, not too far beyond Laverne's grandparents' place off of Jurgen Road. It's north, starts out in the prairie there. And Willow Creek starts there. It's not very deep there. It looks just kind of like a little ditch, but the closer it gets down toward Go through Tomball and then Spring, it's deep in there.
And that Willow area is where the Pilo house that we have here in the museum originally was,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Do you know where that was located back then?
The Pilote House?
Yeah.
If you cross Willow Creek, going south on what's now 2920.
Is it 2978?
No, 2920.
Okay, 2920.
Yeah.
Right.
You know where the Willow Creek Cemetery is?
Yeah.
All right, just a little beyond that, there's Willow Creek, and just a little ways down, there's actually a traffic light there. There was a driveway, went into the right, and that's where the Pilote House was at. Charlie Hooks owned that property prior to it being developed.
So it's just south of that little Willow Creek Cemetery, basically?
That's correct. Yeah, they own vast acreage in there because the land way further out down Student Airline was Pilote land at one time.
I heard they were wealthy timber family, plus later a builder of buildings around the Houston area.
Right. Yeah.
Do you remember anything else about the Willow community?
Well, Willow community, I guess, encompasses quite a big area. Actually, from over where my great-grandparents' place was, all the way over to where the Pilots, are. Their place was at.
What was the names of the?
Johann Hildebrand.
All right.
Yeah, he's the one. His place was, if you go down Dowdale Road,
That's right.
go across the railroad track, his place is back in there.
So back then it was a pretty large area. I heard at one time there was a Willow school down there, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Do you know where that was located back then?
The Willow School was actually, from what I understand, was somewhere along there where the cemetery is.
On Holdreath Road?
Well,
the Willow Creek Cemetery.
Yeah, Willow Creek.
Okay.
And at one time there was a church back there. That was way before 2920 was cut across the creek. Student Airline come down, and actually it dead end right at the creek, I think. And all the through traffic had to take a right on Dowdale Road. Now, there was a little Hildebrand school that was on actually what was my grandfather's. My great-grandfather built that school. I don't know what year it was built. It was just a little one-room school, but it operated until they formed the I think the Klein Independent School District. Encompassed a lot of those. There was a lot of small schools. There was Oak Grove School, French School.
So was French School different from the Willow School?
Yes.
Where was that located?
It was somewhere down towards Spring Stubner and Goslin in that area. Matter of fact, I think that's when my dad went to school because they lived down Goslin Road. Back then, I think that school only went to the 6th grade, and that was it.
I guess that was way before school buses, so they had to go to school fairly close, huh?
Yeah, correct. They walked to school.
You were telling us while we were off camera about the roads in the area. What did you remember about this area?
All of the county roads out here were basically just dirt roads. The only paved road that I can remember was Kirkendall Road. All the other roads were dirt roads. And in the summertime, when it was dry and hot, well, they provided a lot of dirt and dust, especially if the wind was blowing. We lived not too far from Root Road. And if it was in fall when we'd get northers, we didn't have many vehicles go by, but if a vehicle went by, well, it would create dust, and it always, the dust cloud would come to the house. My mother would always say, close the windows, But there wasn't that much traffic at that time, so it really didn't present a big problem. In the fall of the year or beginning of winter, the county maintenance crews would bring their graders and grade the ditches out, putting the dirt up on the top of the road bed. And that was all fine and dandy until we'd have a heavy rain, and in a lot of areas the cars would get stuck due to the wet soil, the dirt on the road. And I can remember even the school bus. That was the only dual-wheel vehicle that would come along, and the school bus would get stuck. He'd go as far as he could, and he'd have to back up, and then he'd hit it again till we'd finally get through. But I could just, always, when I was smaller, I could imagine myself having to spend the night there in the school bus.
Goodness, yeah.
Yeah, but in the 50s, somewhere along in the 50s, I think that's when the county started paving the roads. They would grade the dirt up and mix it with an oil, some kind of oil base, spread it out and pack it, and provided much better roads for us.
So when we were taking a break, I found this old map that actually I think it's in the cover of maybe Leslie Upchurch's book, but this shows what you were talking about right there at Willow Creek where it crosses 2920.
Right.
It shows the church and cemetery on the west side, or the Hooks side, and then on the east side it shows the Willow School might have been over there across the road. Do you remember anything about that?
I don't remember the school building itself. It was possibly gone by the time. We never did use that road very much, not until I was older. So probably the school building was gone. I do remember the old church building.
Over there where you used to go hunting, did they have a swimming hole on the creek?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we'd go swimming in the creek. A lot of time whenever we was pulling corn or gathering corn, it would be so hot, you know, the middle part of the day. After we'd eat our noon meal, sometime me and my cousin would go down to Willow Creek and go swimming, and come back and then have to pull corn again.
Where was the swimming hole y'all liked on Willow Creek?
Well, it was back in that pasture, that Roots pasture. There was a road that went in from Root Road, went all the way to Willow Creek.
Any other memories you'd like to share with us about living in this area so many years?
Well, I've seen it change drastically. I mean, at one time it was just a rural area, you know, just made up mostly of descendants of the settlers, and there wasn't that many people out here. But I guess back in the 60s is whenever some of the first started selling properties, and they wasn't regulated very good at that time, you know. So some of it brought undesired development, but the last few years, development has really taken place. Everything's being covered up with either houses or streets.
Do you remember anything or heard stories about the Fralick's hardware store out there?
Oh yeah.
In Rose Hill?
Whenever I was young, whenever my dad went out there for one reason or another, I thought we was out in West Texas. We never went out very far, you know? And but it was way out there. No, he took things out there, sometime to have repaired, or when we had that little Farmall Cub tractor, well, he'd go out there. Norman stocked parts for it, more sections and guards and belts and bolts and stuff like that. My dad would go out there.
Did you ever see his blacksmith set up?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've been out there when he had that forge going. He didn't like to stand around and talk too much, because it was, when he had it hot, he wanted to keep working.
He was busy, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, he can make wheels. Actually, he made some wheels for my dad for a push cart. He called it a push cart. It was kind of similar to a wheelbarrow, but it had a handle on the back. It was higher up off the ground. It had cultivator wheels, made out of cultivator wheels. And they would eventually rust into. It took a long time. I remember he had one set made. Norman had this big old cone-shaped piece of iron that he would make, you know, put straps around and form them wheels. But Norman could take a piece of metal and do just about anything with it.
Any other memories you'd like to share with us today?
Well, I can't really think of any other. I would just like to say one thing, that I'm happy that the good Lord let me live in the time that I did. I enjoyed my youth, you know, and I found a good woman to marry, had a good wife, a good loving relationship, and my children all turned out good. So I don't know what else I could ask for.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for your time today and sharing your life and your memories. We've had a good time. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it too. Thank you for giving me opportunity to come share some of my life experience and some of my memories. Thank you again.
Great.